You're listening to the Powell Movement.
Welcome to the Powell Movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and this week I have another legend on the show. And I know, it gets old, me calling people legends, but really, the movements that I've had have been pretty legendary, and I'm happy to share them with you. So this week, it's film again, and my guest is Scott Gaffney of MSP Films. And for the past 20 plus years, Scott has been dealing with the elements as the unsung hero who shoots all winter and edits all summer. Speaking of summer, I did have 2 more summer podcasts planned. One has been a ghost over the last week, and the other has wasted at least 5 work days of mine over the past 2 years. I even showed up at his place of work once on his request, but he was a no-show. I'm not going to mention who that is because I'm not that much of an asshole, but I will say the podcast was supposed to be about things on 2 wheels. And if you happen to be listening, please get your shit together and be a man of your word. Before we get into the podcast, I want to ask you to follow me on Instagram at The Powell Movement, tell your friends about the show, and shoot me an email if you have any guest suggestions or just want to share something. My email is mike@thepowellmovement.com, and I will get back to you. I also want to thank my amazing sponsors who make the show happen. They are Evo, Rescue Water, and the 10 Barrel Brewery. Now, let's talk to Scott Gaffney. You are just back from South America, it sounds like.
I am, yeah. Had a great trip to Argentina.
Well, how long did you go for?
About a week and a half.
And for the skier that doesn't ever make it to South America, what are the big differences when you go on a trip down there compared to anywhere else you go?
That's a challenge. You know, this is my first trip actually down there. I've been to Peru for kind of more of a ski mountaineering trip for days of my youth, but for that I didn't even bring my skis. So this was my first time down there. So I don't have a great perspective on experience down there beyond one trip.
That's crazy that you've only been there once. You've been making movies for like 30 years and you've only been to South America to ski once?
Yeah, well, it's just terrible timing because either you're putting a movie out right then and have to turn around the edit immediately, or you're shooting for the year coming up. It's just August and September is their time, and that's our time to put a movie out.
Does that mean you've never done New Zealand or Australia either?
Yeah, exactly.
Man, I would think you would have all those checked off the list, but do you have all the other major ski destinations checked off?
In the Northern Hemisphere, I'm doing pretty well, but in the Southern Hemisphere, I'm an indoor guy in the summer.
You just sit in a basement in a dark room and edit?
Yeah, look at this. Can you see on my screen? It's beautiful down here.
Yeah, I can see. I see some logos in the back, a whole bunch of ski memorabilia. You look like you're hooded up, so you're in a cold basement.
Cold concrete floor. I've got chains on my ankles. Keep me here.
The chains from Murray and Steve who don't let you leave the basement.
Pretty much. It feels that way sometimes.
But home for you is in Tahoe City, and you've been in that area for quite a long time right now. And normally I don't bring up stuff that's going on in your life right now in the beginning of a podcast, but I think I will with your living situation because it seems like over the past 5 years, there has been a major change in the whole Tahoe area, and the KSL Corporation has come in and they've made some changes, and it seems like it's creating a lot of opinions among the locals. And what do you see happening?
Well, you're going there right off the bat.
Right off the bat, man. I was going to do it late, but then I said, I'll do it early.
Throw me to the wolves. Yeah, there's just a change in the whole culture. I think we're seeing it throughout skiing and not just in Tahoe. I think the people of Tahoe are just putting up maybe a stronger fight than it's going elsewhere. But we're seeing it worldwide, especially in North America. Like Europeans they have more culture in their towns and slower build of their resorts. Whereas here, you know, we just have these corporations that come in and they just want to change things and they want to do it quickly. They want to get in and get out. And when you live in these ski communities, it feels like you're being steamrolled. And I think that's the way a lot of people have felt here with KSL coming in. Now there's new hope with it becoming Alterra. I think there might be more of a mountain focus. I suppose everyone here is kind of hoping that's going to be the case. There are some good people at the top at Alterra, that we know and that I've worked with in the past. And they do have more of the spirit of the mountains rather than looking at it as a real estate venture.
It's two views. It's the corporation versus the local mentality. And it sounds like you might have a little bit of both in Alterra, but who knows? Maybe you'll be getting a Red Dog roller rink, a Gold Coast Family Fun Center, and the famous Squallywood Water Park.
Yeah, it's funny because I actually went with my kids to a water park for the first time in my life yesterday down in Reno. And it was awesome. A water park in Reno is awesome. A water park in a place as beautiful as Squaw Valley is not awesome. It's taken away from the whole spirit of the place. The spirit and the reason people live in these mountains and in these kind of environments is for the sense of adventure and for the quality of the mountain life. And so we don't buy into these amenities that they're trying to build to attract everyone. What they want is people here 24/7, as many people as they possibly can. It's affecting the whole feel of living in these mountain towns.
What was the longest lift line you waited in last year?
Oh my God. We had days last year that were absolutely awful. I'd say there were days where we probably had an hour wait at the KT line.
That is crazy. And then how long has it taken you to get home? Have you waited in traffic for hours?
Yeah, I avoid traveling during those times. Like, I suppose there were times where it took me what would normally be a 12-minute drive. It took me 45 minutes or so, but I don't wait until everyone's leaving at the end of the day, and I try to get there prior to everyone. I play that role. I don't get to ski as long as I want because I've got to get out of there quickly so you don't avoid the madness going home. Yeah, it's affected things. It's tough because I think Vail started it all with a cheap pass system. And that's a tough thing there because I don't like skiing being an elitist sport. So I don't mind cheaper passes in a sense. But what those cheap passes have created is just way more people there all of the time. And it affects your skiing experience on a daily basis more than just the weekends now.
For you, I mean, you have boys, and when you see it through the eyes of your boys, I'm sure when you had them, you thought they might live their whole lives in the Squaw Valley area based on the terrain, the beauty, and everything. But it's changing, and it's only going to change some more. I mean, do you see your boys at one day moving to a mountain that's a little bit less trafficked and be able to really enjoy the experience?
I hate the thought of not living here. I've kind of devoted my life to this place, and the only thing that is a threat to me moving from here is this development and overdevelopment. It's because it's taking away that feel of being in the mountains. And so I would hate to see my kids be pushed out with that as well, but it's a very real threat for sure.
Probably something totally different than you experienced growing up in northern New York. Home for you was what? Big Tupper was your home mountain?
You did your research. Yeah, it was a great mom and pop place. I grew up in Tupper Lake when I was really young and then moved to a town called Canton, which was about an hour and 15 minutes away. And Big Tupper was just awesome. It's just that kind of place with a couple of double chairs, a T-bar. You've got to just run all over the hill and do what you want. And it was never a zoo. And it just had that feel to it where you were connected with the mountain rather than you were just a number being pushed through a turnstile. I think that's something that is really getting lost in skiing these days. And I think that's the saddest aspect of our sport right now is these ski areas being turned into resorts all in the name of greed.
Yeah. Once you become scanned through a lift line, not scanned by a person, but scanned by a gate, I feel like that's where the first connection of just human interaction is lost. But your dad's a ski patroller there, right?
My dad was a ski patroller back in the day. He was the only doctor in town. And so he was a ski patroller as well. And there's actually a funny story there. I spiral fractured my tib fib when I was 5. I just turned 5. I was skiing with him alone at the time, just the two of us. And he had to leave me up there on Trail 6 with a broken tib fib for him to go down and get the sled, ride back up the T-bar and come back around and get me. That was a fairly traumatic thing and one of my earlier memories.
Yeah, I can't believe you kept skiing after that. That's one of those things where I would think a kid might think twice about it.
Hopefully that love for me was already in there. Actually, one of the funniest things about that, though, is I got chickenpox like 2 weeks later. So I had chickenpox all under my cast.
Oh.
I remember as a kindergartner just sticking like pencils and whatever I could get sharp under my cast trying to scratch my chickenpox.
Sounds miserable.
Chickenpox went away though over the rest of my body. And then I got my cast off 6 weeks later and I had chickenpox all down that leg still because they hadn't gotten air to heal.
I didn't know your dad was a doctor, so I was going to say there can't be a ton of money coming into the family from a ski patrol salary, but then I also thought your mom's name is Bunny, and with a name like Bunny, it's either you're on stage 4 or you come from money, so I'm guessing that your childhood was pretty easy?
No, if you knew the town we live in, if you knew Tupper Lake, there's not a lot of money there. So my dad, actually being the only doctor, he was on call all the time, and there were people who just couldn't pay. And he had a good heart. He was named Citizen of the Year one year in the town just because he was giving his entire self to his practice and the town. And my mom actually is named Bunny because she was born on Easter.
Okay.
We call her Energizer Bunny because she's now 82 and she's still moving fast.
She had a great segment in, I think it was 1999.
Yeah, she threw down, Ed.
Yeah, it was pretty sick. So search for that on the internet. You can see Bunny Gaffney really getting after it in Montana. But when you're growing up, do you play any other sports or are you focused on just skiing because your dad's fully immersed in it and I'm sure the whole family is?
I was pretty much focused on skiing into high school, and then I got into kayaking and spent a lot of time on the Ottawa River in Canada along the Ontario-Quebec border. So kayaking became my summertime thing. I was heavily into that for a lot of years. I worked at a place called Wilderness Tours for about 10 summers as a rafting guide and kayak instructor and the whole bit. So whitewater was my summertime life.
Were you like an Eagle Scout growing up too? It sounds like that could be in your wheelhouse.
No, I wasn't that. I was the kid with the slingshot and no Eagle Scouting, no Cub Scouts, the whole bit.
And no team sports either?
I was into basketball. Hoops was my thing, but I was always the smallest guy. I was like 5'1" until I was 16. And so I was just a late developer, and that kind of played against me as far as basketball went. But that would be my number one team sport.
You had you and Robb. Are there any other brothers or sisters in the family?
We have an older brother, Steve.
And were you guys tight with him as well?
We were. He was a ripping skier and kind of set the tone for us. He got out of it when he went to college. Yeah, he was one of the guys everyone watched at the ski area when we were younger.
You've always been a guy who's got a really great sense of humor. You do funny shit, and I'm sure when you're younger that can get you in trouble. I mean, were you the prankster when you were younger as well as now?
I guess you could say I was a prankster. I got in a little trouble for some graffiti in my hometown with a buddy of mine. Some little legal issues there, but was able to weasel my way out of that one by paying a little bit of money.
Were you a big graffiti artist? Were you tagging things all over town as a youth?
It was short-lived, but I did a little bit of that, yeah.
That was a part of your rebellious stage. I'm going to destroy some property.
Then I got busted. And now looking back on it, yeah, it was stupid. I was always into art, and I was heavily influenced by riding trains in New York City and riding through the Bronx and seeing all this graffiti on the walls. And I thought it was cool art. And I wanted to kind of do that. I wasn't nearly as good as the stuff that I saw.
And then when do you see your first ski movie? Because I hear that you saw a Warren Miller movie, you see Scott Schmidt in it, and it totally changes your perspective on skiing and what your life is going to be.
I think we were in Crested Butte, my first trip ever skiing out west. And we visited some friends there, and I think that's where I saw it, but it was Ski Time, and it was Scott Schmidt's breakout performance. And it was just insane for the time. It was years after they had actually shot that movie, but I hadn't seen a ski movie before. And that's when he hit up Schmidtiets and was skiing down Eagle's Nest and all kinds of stuff. And I was just blown away by that. And I think that next summer, we visited Squaw and hiked all over Squaw and slid down some snow under the Palisades, just kind of glissading down National Chute. And I was kind of hooked. And then, this is a very common story, but in college, a friend of mine bought Blizzard of Oz, and he invited me over to his house one night. I watched it and walked out of his house, and I knew it was like this feeling in me that my life had just changed having seen that movie. That's almost cliched in the reactions people have had to Blizzard of Oz, but that's the reaction I had. And at the time, I was in college for video and film production. And when I graduated, I didn't know what I was going to do, but I bought a camera along the way, moved to Colorado, and went from there.
So when you leave home, you go to Ithaca, and that's a great school. Robb's at home still dreaming about being a skier in high school. You're in college and totally separate, and he's kind of got to feel alone because all of his brothers are gone now. And is he still pursuing a ski dream? Because I guess if I look at the two of you in terms of ski careers, he had a pretty big ski career early on, and you were more of a behind the scenes dude. And was it weird having a brother who excelled per se in the pro ski realm?
He was better than I was, and I accepted that. Like, he was 2 years younger, but he was a better skier than I was. He floated these big threes off jumps. He had better style than I did. And I just had a creative eye. And that's something that I think has always gone through my life. Like, when I look back at it, it's like, why didn't I try to pursue the pro skier route more? I just never had a drive to do that. I like combining this creativity side of looking at things. I've always looked at things through a frame. And I like doing that. And I think I just wanted to convey that with skiing. And he just had such a fluid style, and he was better than I was and whatever. So I was fully accepting of my place there between the two of us anyway.
When he ends up going to Colorado, you eventually graduate from Ithaca, and is the first thing you do to move out west?
Yeah, I hung out with him in Boulder for a little bit. He went to CU Boulder. And, being a kid from New York, it was just like, where do you move to? Well, Colorado. It's kind of like what Texans think of the best place to go skiing.
Yep.
So I went to Colorado, and I had actually taken an EMT class in the fall after I graduated. And I was like, you don't know what you're going to use this for, but a wilderness EMT is a great thing to have. And so I took this wilderness EMT class, then moved to Colorado, and thought I'd try to be a ski patroller. I hung out with him in Boulder for a little bit, then went up to Summit County, tried to find a job. I was hoping to patrol at Keystone, of all places, and I didn't get the job right away, so I took a job as a lift op, and I was hoping to work my way up to being a patroller, and then I broke my collarbone, I think my third day skiing at Keystone. So that derailed my hope of being a patroller that year. So I was just a night lift op, and spent all my days skiing at Arapahoe Basin, enjoyed that part for a little bit.
Before we get into enjoying that part, I'm going to enjoy talking about my sponsors real quick. And my first sponsor is Evo, and they are hands down the best retail location in the country for bike, skate, wake, surf, lifestyle, and more. And they have everything you could possibly want for your adventure. I have personally shopped at Evo since they opened because no one comes close to the service they offer and the vibe they create. Their stores in Denver, Seattle, and Portland are some of the best retail experiences you'll find. And if you can't make it to a store, well, Evo.com has all the brands, all the products, and a low price guarantee, free shipping on orders over $50, and a no-hassle return policy. For listening to the show, they're going to give you 10% off your entire order. If you're in-store, mention the code TPM10 to your cashier. And if you're online, use the code TPM10. That's all one word with capital letters, and you'll get that 10% off. Rescue Water is my next sponsor, and they are all about proactive recovery. What does that mean to you? Well, think of it like this. If you're really tired, you skip the coffee and grab an energy drink. Well, if you really need to hydrate, like when you're done a workout or get off the hill or trail, skip the sports drink and drink a cold Rescue Water. It replaces electrolytes much better than anything else you've ever used to hydrate. It's science and it works. I make it work for me after big nights at the bar. Let me tell you, one Rescue Water before bed and I'm hangover free in the morning. Make Rescue Water work for you by heading over to rescuewater.com to save 20% on a 12-pack case with the code RESQWaterTPM. Rescue Water is also available on Amazon. My final sponsor brews beer, drinks beer, and wants everyone to drink beer outside. They're the 10 Barrel Brewery based out of Bend, Oregon, and they are all about supporting action sports and the people that love them. They also happen to make some of the best beer in the world. If you haven't had a 10 Barrel, you're missing out. I love the Out of Office Pilsner, but really, I'm happy with any of the beers. They're all really tasty. Next time you head to the store, pick up some 10 Barrel and see what I'm talking about. And if you happen to be in Bend, Portland, Denver, Idaho, or San Diego, pop into one of the 10 Barrel brew pubs, order a flight, and pick your favorite. Support the beer that supports action sports, the 10 Barrel Brewery. Find out more at 10barrel.com. Those are my sponsors, so we'll get back to it. So you're in Summit County, and is the whole crew from Boulder coming up? Because your brother's got a pretty solid crew that he's hooked up with at University of Colorado. Who is he skiing with, and who becomes your crew?
How do you know this stuff?
I do some research. I talk to people.
Good for you. He lived in a house with like 8 people or something like that. And so they spent a fair bit of time coming up to Arapahoe Basin, but probably spent most of their time skiing at Berthoud Pass. And Berthoud was open that first year, I think, that I moved out there. And so they're riding the chairs at Berthoud. And then when Berthoud shut down, it might have been the very next year, he spent a lot of time hiking at Berthoud and touring around there. Actually, I don't think they had touring gear yet. It was just boot packing everywhere. It was a lot of semi-backcountry skiing at the time there.
And who was the crew? Because I think it's in a list of ski legends, but at that time, they're just dirtbag skiers who are all either trying to go to school or going to school. And who is that crew?
If you're trying to get at Shane, he wasn't part of the picture quite yet. They did meet Shane. Shane delivered pizzas to their house in like 92 or something like that.
Was Kreitler part of that crew and Jaquit?
Kreitler wasn't part of that crew either. My brother, he competed against these guys in mogul competitions a little bit, like the CU Bump Bash. And actually, he almost won it one of the years. I think he might have lost to Shane in the semis or something like that. So he just had a crew. His housemates were all just chill people who love skiing every day, but no big names within the crew. But we did meet Shane through that process. Shane delivered pizzas to their house one day and saw their skis line against the wall and said, "Hey, if you guys want to come out, I've got a movie premiere coming up." And that was for Ski Theater, a Nick Nixon movie, probably in 91, I want to say. So they went to see this movie that the pizza delivery guy was in, and it turned out the guy ripped. And so they kind of befriended Shane over time. It wasn't a quick thing, but then another friend, one of my brother's roommates, moved to Vail and then became better friends with Shane. And then we all started kind of grouping together, and that obviously took off after that.
I've talked with Jaquit and a couple different people, and they said that there was a house that they all lived in, and it was crazy. And were you guys all hanging out with them then?
No. I forget the number of that house. That was a famed house, and I think my brother's crew knew of that house, but no, they didn't circulate with the same crowd at the time.
Was it because your brother was smarter and more reserved and they were wilder?
It could have been that way. I think my brother had a little more focus. That Shane Kreitler house seemed just a little bit nuts, and it was probably beyond what my brother was into.
Okay.
They weren't far away. They were both houses on the hill in Boulder. My brother lived right next to the hill. But yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of mixing there.
For you at this time, do you have a camera at this time? And are you starting to work on putting together some footage?
Yeah, I had saved up some money. And when I moved from New York to Colorado, I just bought a Hi8 camera, the top of the line consumer Hi8 camera, and moved to Summit County, not knowing what I was going to do with the camera. But I just started shooting, and it was a whole different time than it is right now. And, there weren't too many guys out there or anyone out there with a camera. And it was pretty sweet because really good skiers kind of gravitated toward the camera because they saw it as a potential outlet. I met up with a lot of the best skiers at Arapahoe Basin, like Justin Patnode and Chris Carson and a bunch of other locals there. And Justin Patnode had been in Greg Stump's latest movie, and Chris Carson was on the Pro Mogul Tour, and there were a bunch of Pro Mogul skiers, and we all just started filming. And that was pretty cool for a kid who had just moved out there. Like, I was meeting names right away.
Eventually, you end up, I'll call it graduating, because I moved to Colorado as well, and I found that after a couple years there, people move. They either go to Jackson Hole or to Squaw Valley, it seems like. And for you, was it just time for new terrain?
Well, I loved the scene at Arapahoe Basin and the skiers I got to ski with there and the friendships I made. But the snowpack just did not do it for me. And I wanted a place where you didn't have to probe all your landings and where you weren't hitting sharks nonstop and places where you were in fear for your life when you went out in the backcountry. And Tahoe seemed like a really good place for that. And besides that, Tahoe at the time was an absolute epicenter for filmmaking. You know, that's where Scott Schmidt was from. That's where John Treman was from, the Deloriers and Kevin Andrews, and Stump was making movies there that just showed it as this hotbed, this epicenter for everything in extreme movies. And so kind of want to be part of that and then check it out. And so I moved to Tahoe and never left.
How are you getting by? Because I'm sure there's not a lot of money coming into your account being just, for lack of a better term, the dirtbag skier with a camera. So how are you paying the bills?
I was definitely a dirtbag ski bum. You know, I lived in a loft with my brother in such a small area that if I dove into my room, I was landing on my bed because it was the size of a closet. The first year I was working race services at Squaw and shooting whenever I could. And my second year there, I was bussing tables at a restaurant in Tahoe City. It's funny because I was bussing tables in one town and Shane was bussing tables in at the Passage in Truckee the same year. And that's kind of when both of our careers took off, I'd say. We were doing those crappy little jobs to get by.
Did a whole crew move out from Colorado with you? Because when I think about it, a lot of people that were in Colorado when you were there, although they might not have been your best friends, they all end up in Squaw Valley too.
Well, we encouraged Shane to move that way. I don't know what Kreitler's exact approach was, but he came out at the same time that Shane did, pretty much. And they weren't living together or anything. And I don't know if it was a joint choice by both of them to move out here, but it just happened right around the same time. But it wasn't hard twisting Shane's arm to come back here. He had been kicked out of Vail, didn't love Vail anyway, and he grew up skiing Squaw. And so we just said, man, you ought to come back here. And we were trying to convince him, like, this is where everything seems to be happening. All the best skiers are, photographers, filmmakers, whatever. So he was like, yeah, no problem. I'm going out there.
And then your first movie out of Squaw was Walls of Freedom. And that's about 96. So you've been out there a couple years and you're able to put this together. And nowadays, you know how to make a movie. But back then, you probably didn't know what the hell you were doing. You're trying to figure it out. And what were the big challenges in that first couple years?
Well, part of it was money. Yeah, that was 95. And part of it was just having the money to do it. It was certainly never a job or anything I looked at as a job. It was just a full-on passion project. You know, I didn't have any sponsors for Walls of Freedom. Fortunately, I was shooting on hiatus. It's not like I was shooting film where you're spending $110 for every 3 minutes. But I just shot every day that I could. And the biggest challenges, well, back then, a lot of it was just shooting in bounds. And it's pretty easy at Squaw once you accept that there are so many good skiers and they're going to assault all the terrain right in front of you. Once you get past that, you realize that there's still so much good terrain and it's so photogenic there, you know, with clean cliffs and cool rock and blue skies and really good snow. So that part wasn't a challenge. I guess the biggest challenge back in the day was the editing process. Linear editing, like it was a whole different world technically than it is today. It would be too hard to explain the whole process, but you're sitting there editing and laying in music, and I'd have this song and I'd know at some point I wanted to put some voiceover in or some other sounds in. And so you have to map it out where you're like, okay, 21 seconds in, I'm going to turn the music down manually for 6 seconds to put this voiceover in. And then I'm going to put the music back up. It was this whole crazy linear thing that you had to do as you laid it all out that people wouldn't even comprehend today. They'd be blown away. If you're an editor today and you looked at what we did back then or what I had to do, at least on the gear I was working on, it's mind-boggling.
That's a big difference. We'll see how much of that makes it in there, but it
right.
has been a big change.
But I will say that even when I moved to Tahoe and moved to Squaw, the skiers were still attracted by a camera at the day. There weren't many camera guys out there. And like Tom Day was a local filmer, and there were a couple other guys, but for the most part, within my first and second year, I was shooting with all these guys that were legends in my mind, like John Treman and Dean Conway. And then I shot Scott Schmidt windsurfing, and like all these guys who were my absolute heroes were suddenly skiing in front of my camera, and it was wild. That's because they didn't have so many outlets. It's not like today where you have 5,000 people on the mountain with a GoPro on their head on any given day. It was, you were the guy with the camera and, hey, I'll ski for you.
You had to really want it back then. I mean, you had to give up a lot of your personal ski time to be a filmer and actually create the content. So while there weren't a lot of people out there, I mean, you needed to have the money to invest in the camera. You needed to be willing to give up the time that you would be normally having fun to create something. And I don't know if many people were willing to do that at that point.
You know, that's still one of the biggest challenges today for me, is missing out on it when it's really good. But for some reason I have this ability to accept that. And I always have, and I don't know what it is. I'm getting the satisfaction of getting shots from being behind the camera and sacrificing those great conditions. I still want to ski as hard as I can. I want those powder days. I want to have fun. But there's something about it where if I'm getting shots on those same days, I get a different level of satisfaction.
Now I'm going to head back a little bit. So in 1993, I think you're in Crested Butte, and you end up meeting the Matchstick guys, Murray and Steve. You end up crashing at their place because you're a dirtbag skier, you're going to a festival, and you have no place to sleep. And is that where the relationship with MSP starts?
That is. Yeah, I had a movie called The Edge of Existence in the International Ski Film Festival in Crested Butte. And, it was just something I shot on my Hi8 camera. And I was sleeping in my car in the parking lot. And I'd spent one night out there, and I think it was like 20 below. It was pretty damn cold. And I happened to mention that, I think, to Steve or Murray the next day. And they're like, oh, man, what are you doing? Come stay at my house. And so I stayed at their house. They ended up beating me. They got first with their movie, and I got second. I think I got second in that. And there was a conversation of like, maybe we'll hook up one of these days, join forces. That didn't happen until years down the road when Steve was hurt in his helicopter crash and could no longer ski. But at that point, they were like, hey, you want to come work for Real Adventure Films, which was, Matchstick's name prior to that. And sure enough, I said, yeah, I'd start shooting film. And so in 1998, I joined them. I can share another funny story with you. You brought up the passion and just doing whatever it takes to make happen. And I've shared the story a couple times with friends, but I've never shared it beyond that. But I was making a movie called The Edge of Existence in 1992, 93. And, you got to work all different hours around other people's editing schedules to get super cheap editing time. And I was working at this guy's house in Arvada, Colorado. And rather than drive back to my brother's place in Boulder, I'd spend the nights, I'd be editing all night in Arvada, and I was sleeping in my car for a few hours when I could, and, just full on car camping in the middle of a suburban district. And I would go and take showers. I realized at a certain time that the sprinkler systems would come on in the local Arvada football field, and I'd go out and take my showers on the football field in the sprinkler systems. That's just kind of the thing you do to make it all happen. You do whatever you can to get by.
That is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, I've heard a lot of people do a lot of weird things, but going to the high school and showering in their sprinkler system, I don't even think homeless people think to do that.
Well, I'd bring out like Dr. Bronner's, the peppermint soap, the biodegradable soap, and I'd go out there and lather all up in the football field with the lights were off. And yeah, it worked.
And you had hair back then, so you probably had to use shampoo.
Yeah, I did. I had long, blonde, flowing locks for a while.
I guess if you look at you now, if you cross yourself with Mike Hattrip, you have Mr. Clean. It's that look. But back then, you were the ultimate dirtbag, hair down to the middle of your back, and totally different look.
I'm still the dirtbag. I just don't have the hair.
Yeah, well, you're like a family man now. You have a life. You're not in your 20s anymore. But in 97, Steve Winter is in that helicopter crash, and MSP reaches out to you, and they want you to be part of Sixth Sense. I mean, they need you. At that point, it's only Murray. Steve can't go out there and film. And what is your role with MSP for that year? Because I believe you do 1 year with them, take a break, and then come back.
Yeah, exactly. I was just a cinematographer at the time and joined them for that movie. And it was kind of crazy because that was my first year working with them. And I think I shot probably half of that movie. I had a great trip to Alaska with Seth and Jeremy Nobis, and Shane was up there, and JT and Wendy Fisher. And Shane was up there as Saucer Boy, and that's where we really brought Saucer Boy to life. It wasn't the start of Saucer Boy. He had appeared in Pura Vida the year before that, but it was easy for Shane and I just to take Saucer Boy and run with it from there. And I mean, that was a really big year in my career. And the next year I went back to making my own movie again, because that's really what I wanted to do, put something together from start to finish. But then the year after that, I joined them for Ski Movie, and it's been MSP ever since.
And I would say that Ski Movie there were a lot of movies that they made, but to the masses, that was the one that got so much press. I think you had 3 Ski Movies.
Ski Movie 1 and 2, and then 3, was the front line.
The talent in those movies was ridiculous. I mean, you look back to the forefathers of what free skiing became, and it was a lot of the guys in that movie and big personalities, but some of the funny stuff, I always think of Brad Holmes rapping, and whose idea are some of these? Because I know you're a quirky dude who comes up with a lot of funny shit, and is a lot of the funny stuff coming from your brain?
A lot of it is Brad Holmes' stuff was from his own brain, which is a special place in itself. A lot of it came from me and Shane, because we just had really similar personalities, similar humors, I guess. And we just found the same things funny. And we'd sit around and mention something, and we'd be like, write it down, write that idea down. And we just kind of roll with it later. But I like cheesy humor. I've always been really entertained by, old school movies like Naked Gun or go back to Airplane and those kinds of things. I don't think cheesy is such a bad thing. I think when you're having fun, when you're entertaining, that's one of the best times to be either being a filmmaker or watching movies. It's just nice to be entertained, and it's nice to laugh. And it's weird because I'm not necessarily a super humorous guy outwardly. I'm kind of shy and whatever, but I guess I do have a fairly wacky sense of humor, and I'm not afraid to run with it.
You come up with ideas and execute them instead of spur of the moment funniness.
Right. I'm just quiet, and I think I can be funny when I get to know people and I'm in environments I'm comfortable with, but otherwise I sit back and kind of watch.
And when did you and Shane, I believe you guys ended up living together, and when does that happen?
I moved in with him in 96 and late 96 or early 97, and then lived with him through 2001, I believe it was.
Would you look at those years as some of, I would say, maybe the funniest times of your life?
Yeah, that's how I'd characterize it for sure. I mean, we were loving life. It was loose. It was fast. It was fun. It was really carefree.
I feel like with him, all the stuff you saw in the movies was actually really who he was. So if you were to walk out of a bathroom and Shane was to say, hey, I got to show you something that's really important, and he's bent over spreading his butt cheeks in a room when you walk in, that's kind of normal.
Yeah, I don't remember that moment specifically, but yeah, I've always said that the person people saw as Shane through movies was times 10 in real life, because he took the most ordinary days and made them memorable. And that was one of the most special things about him. And so when you're living with him for well over 1,000 days, there are a lot of memories in there and a lot of hysterical moments and things you're just not going to forget. And I find myself telling Shane stories everywhere I go still, just because there are so many things that remind you of him and so many ridiculous moments that generated out of nothingness. That was a gift that he had.
Shane, he would always talk about being calculated and really thinking about all the different stunts that he was doing, and I'm sure he's putting together a lot of these with you. Are they all calculated early on, or is there some young, wild, reckless Shane as well?
Well, he was totally calculated, and your perspective of recklessness is all relative, but you don't get to be as good or as amazing as he was without some level of recklessness. And so sometimes he was just winging it, whether that was in skiing or in everyday life or in base jumping. There were some things in base jumping where he didn't do the smartest thing in the world, you know? So he had the side where he had a sense of self-preservation and he was calculated and he really thought things through. But there were times where he was just sending it.
And did you ever get into base jumping?
The only base jump I ever did was at his bachelor party. And that was off a bridge in California over Lake Pterodactyl. It was just a bridge where you just opened and hit water right away. So there wasn't actually a whole lot you did to it. But we had to do a beer funnel just prior and then put your head on a baseball bat and do the spin around real quickly, several times around the baseball bat, and then stand on the rail and then jump.
So there's no recklessness at all.
No recklessness. Well, it was pilot chute assisted, so we weren't actually throwing the pilot chute, so there was no chance of error there. So someone else was holding your pilot chute as you jumped. It was entertaining, I'll tell you that.
Did you see the thrill that all the people that are into base jumping find? Because it sounds like you didn't get the bug.
No, I was scared of it. I thought of it as a real equipment reliant sport. Even though I saw so much success in it, I didn't see too many errors. I was around it a lot. That's one of those things where I don't know why I didn't get into it, especially at the time, because I didn't have kids. I didn't have any kind of family. It would have seemed natural to pursue that because it seemed like the most thrilling thing imaginable. But I think it was just, I had a little fear of the equipment failing me. I like to be in control of the things that I'm pushing. And for some reason, base jumping seemed like there was an element that was out of my control. And that was the most critical element, was your gear functioning properly.
Did you ever have any reservations of shooting it?
No, I did, because I watched these guys develop through their careers. And Shane was a slow developer in base jumping. He didn't just fly into it. JT was a quick developer in base jumping. He got into base jumping real quickly because he didn't want to put in so much skydiving time that Shane did. But I wasn't subject to too many mistakes. And so it seemed like a pretty safe sport. I mean, as scary as base jumping looks from the outside, when you're around these guys and they're doing it all the time and they're landing everything all the time, they're all fired up and whatever, it looks like a pretty fun, safe sport.
Yep, it is until it isn't, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And when it isn't, bad things happen. And unfortunately for you, I mean, we're kind of not really going to talk about your full MSP career. We're kind of going to find out about you. If people want to find out about the movies you've made, well, there are a shit ton online. You can see all of them. We'll talk about a couple in a minute. But one thing that you did experience, which most of us hopefully will never, ever experience in our entire lives, is watching your best friend pass. And I can't imagine anything more difficult.
Actually, I wasn't there. I should have been there, but I blew my knee a couple months prior to that. And so it's one of those situations where I wonder if it would have been different had I been there. But I got a phone call while I was in physical therapy. Yeah, the worst call of my life.
Because this is your best friend. Life has changed right there on that phone call. And what do you do immediately? Is it going to Sherry and making sure she's okay? Or are you just trying to get yourself together or not believing it? I think it might have been you who wrote that it was like Superman dying. And I think that was one of the best quotes that I think anybody said at that time. It's life-changing for everyone, but to his best friend, how do you go on?
I mean, anyone who loses someone that close to them, you're just floored. And I was on the phone with Steve Winter. I could hear JT was on the phone with Sherry at the same time. So I got off the phone, called Sherry, and we're both just lost. She was down in Southern California with Ayla on her own. And I felt alone, and JT was over there in Europe, and he felt terribly alone. It was gnarly. And it's just one of those things where you don't feel you'll ever get past it. And time does heal wounds, but that doesn't mean I spent a year where I would wake up, and I think within the first 5 seconds of waking up in the morning, I would be thinking of Shane. For just about a year, I had dreams nonstop. And my wife and I were talking about this last night, how she used to have Shane dreams, and I would have Shane dreams all the time. I would have these base jumping dreams where I was base jumping with him, and we were going to all these cool locations. I don't even base jump, but there were times when he'd hit the ground and then he'd get back up. And we'd be like, oh, whew, we escaped that one. And then there were times where you knew Shane was dead in your dream, but he was hanging out with you and you felt like you had this special moment. There are tricky things that carry on. And this is 9 years later. So you never get past it, but I don't have the problem where I have to deal with it every day and feel pain every day anymore, you know, and so in some sense, time does heal those wounds, but in others, there are still things that are there. And one of the things I really like to do is read tributes that other people write or stories about when Shane met people, because there are so many things out there online of where Shane met someone for 15 minutes and that 15 minutes changed someone's life. And those kinds of things, even today, will make me tear up.
You happen to be his best friend, but anybody that met him and spent a little bit of time with him felt like they were great friends with him because he had that kind of personality that made you feel like you clicked. I know so many people who are like, yeah, oh, we were great friends. But in reality, if you think back to it, they probably only met him like 4 times. He was just such an awesome guy that they will never forget him. The whole story can be seen in the McConkie movie, which is a project that you worked on, which has got to be a big challenge when you lose your best friend and then you have to go through 20 years of footage through him and try to pick what is the best that tells his story. And I'm sure you probably left hours of it on the cutting room floor.
Well, I made rough cuts. We had another editor from New York, David Zeef, who was working with us, which was absolutely necessary because I deemed so much of Shane's life as important. And so I was making rough cuts and trying to narrow stuff down. And when I narrowed stuff down, I basically edited a 12-hour movie that I thought was rad. So we had to take this 12-hour movie and make it an hour and a half. And so that's where this other guy really came in. But man, there was so much material there. And for me, there were a lot of things that I didn't know about Shane's life that was awesome to learn about. And then there were a ton of things where it was just like a walk down memory lane for me. And when I'd go to bed at night after editing late into the night, I'd feel like I had just hung out with Shane all day. And so to be doing that a couple of years after he died was awesome to have that sensation. As painful as that process was, I also loved that element of the process. The fact that it felt like I was chilling with my best buddy again.
And will the 12-hour movie ever make it to light?
Yeah, Jake would probably push this one, right? But I would love it, but I think we're just too busy of people. We don't have the time or money. Unfortunately, to have music rights and all that. There are a bunch of issues behind it that would keep that from happening. But I wish everyone could see it and see all the stuff that I saw.
Well, I figured out a way how to make some more money in Squaw Valley or that whole area is once the traffic gets even worse, you can start a food cart where you're walking up and down between the cars and you will make a killing.
I like the way you're thinking. And more billboards. We need more billboards.
You'll have weed billboards soon enough. We have them in Seattle. You'll be driving up to Squaw Valley and you'll just see a big sign that says marijuana right next to McDonald's.
Nice.
So in your life as a filmmaker, we really haven't talked about what you do. And what you do isn't that glorious when you're doing it. I mean, to me, unless you're a full-on mountain man, which you are, it would absolutely suck. I mean, you love to ski, but you're carrying a heavy backpack, probably a 40-pound backpack through challenging terrain. You're sweating when it's freezing, and you're sweating when it's not freezing, and you're hurry up and wait. And what is a day out in the field like for you?
Yeah, as you said, it's not as glamorous as a lot of people think it would be. It's slow, and that's the biggest element of making movies is that everything moves so slowly. Like, if you're out there in a helicopter all day and you get in 6 or 7 lines, that's a good day. Like, a lot of people would think, oh, you're just lapping things like crazy and you're getting 20 runs in. You're doing all... No, it doesn't work that way. You're moving things very slowly and you're working with light and you're working with snow conditions and whatever. And you're carrying these packs around and you're changing angles or whatever. There's a lot that goes into it, but as non-glamorous as the actual scene is when you're out there, I kind of love every element of it. When I was younger, I would have considered this an absolute dream job. And it is. I'm working with good friends out in some of the coolest environments imaginable, and I'm getting paid to do it. And what's better than that?
I guess the negative is maybe it's not always comfortable.
It's not always comfortable, but I like being in discomfort sometimes. You know, it's one of those things that it makes you feel alive when you're out there, when you're in these strong winds or whatever. Like, I just was in Bariloche in Argentina. I left Tahoe where it was 90 degrees and smoky. And days later, I was standing in this whipping wind and people were freezing because the wind was driving so hard and the spindrift was going into your, the crevices in your jacket or whatever. And I remember just standing out there and thinking, this is freaking awesome. Like, I love that feeling of being exposed in those elements. And so there are days where it sucks. Yeah. But for the most part, just being out in that environment is super fulfilling.
And how much are you traveling? Because it's got to be tough on your family. You've got boys, you've got a wife, and you're on the road a lot, I would think.
I used to travel a lot more. Now I try to limit my trips to like a maximum of 2.5 weeks for a single trip. It's tough going any longer than that. You want to be back with your kids. So yeah, 2.5 weeks. And I try to get a little downtime at home before going again. We used to do a lot more exotic trips with MSP, but I think these days, like, everyone finds that the exotic trips don't tend to pay off as much as you would like them to. And when it comes right down to it, a lot of the skiers want to get shots and they want to get the raddest action possible. And that sickest action possible tends to come in BC or Alaska or coastal snowpacks around North America that are fairly easy to access, rather than going to Eastern Europe or, these far off lands. So we tend to stay a little closer now, right along the west coast of North America and do less of that real exotic traveling.
In terms of the movies, I'll say over the past 3 years, MSP has been an enigma to me. So maybe 3 years ago, you guys had a shitty winter and you made a movie about having a shitty winter, which to me was weird because it was like, yeah, I think everybody had a shitty winter. But you guys, that was the theme of the movie was, hey, our winter sucks and we're still going out in it. Is that the thought process behind that one?
Yeah, I think Marcus Ader has always summed it up best. Like, that year, everywhere we went was bad. And he kept saying, whether it was after a day or after a trip or after a single run, he'd say, still fun though. I almost wanted to call the movie Still Fun though, because you still have so much fun skiing. It's one of the best things you could possibly do. And there are so many ways to have fun. And in so many conditions, you can still enjoy that moment. And so I think we tried to convey that with that movie. And hopefully it wasn't just a fully morbid feeling to it. Hopefully there was a feeling of, yeah, so you can get shafted a lot of places you go, or a year can suck. But the sport is still fun to do no matter what conditions.
I looked at it as you guys just thought it was a shitty year.
Oh, yeah.
But then the next year, because it's weird, because I've looked at you guys as setting the bar for movies for pretty much since you started in Ski Movie. And then the next year, you guys totally shifted directions by telling a story, which to me, I don't think people in the ski industry go to the movies to see a story. But that was a departure from what you were used to. And was that a conscious decision? And what did you think about it?
When you've been making movies for as long as we have, if you do the same exact thing every year, things get really stale. And if you just ride on those laurels of everything you've done in the past, where's the joy as a viewer and where's the joy as a filmmaker in what you do? Like, you should go in waves and create different feels throughout. So yeah, that movie Ruin and Rose that year, we let this guy Ben Sturgeluski, a really qualified, really good filmmaker, creative guy, he had this idea and MSP was like, let's run with this. And so it was a bit of a gamble and not everyone dug it. But I think when you watch that movie from a cinematography standpoint and creative standpoint, it's still a really good movie. It's just people didn't feel it was necessarily a ski movie. So the next year I wanted to do an about face and come up with this movie that was like 180 degrees different than Ruin and Rose. And I think that's the cool thing as filmmakers is you have that liberty to change from year to year and do whatever the hell you want. And so the next year was just this totally irreverent, fun, cheesy ski movie, Drop Everything, where we just enjoyed ourselves with it. And yeah, people dug it again. And I think what it comes down to is everyone wants something creative and different and cool. And yet when they realize that, okay, maybe we just want a ski movie that's entertaining and just floors us and just stokes us out.
Well, that's what they want from you.
Yeah.
What I expect from Matchstick, and it's what you said, gets stale over time. It never got stale for me, and I don't think it got stale for a lot of other people. We just expected that same type of movie, and I think when a story came into it, it changed it, and then you Drop Everything, and it's like, okay, this is exactly what we expected. Last year was just, an anomaly, to bring up a TGR name.
And I think what we learned through this process is maybe it's not such a bad thing to do a similar thing every year, because there are so many different places to get different kinds of content these days that you can get the stories from this other film company. You can get this art over in this other film company. And then you can get this kick-ass action and a fun feeling movie from MSP. And so maybe that is our place, and maybe that's what we should just deliver. In the end, I feel like the best thing in watching a ski movie is to walk out and be fired up.
Yep.
And to have had a good time. And for me, entertainment is probably the biggest thing I want to deliver in movies these days, is to make something entertaining. So people have that feeling when they walk out. I was entertained. I had fun. I'm stoked to go skiing.
The last thing I want to do when I leave a ski movie is think about a storyline or how it's going to affect the world in some way.
Right.
That's me.
There you go.
And this year you guys have 2 films coming out, Hoji and All In. And are you working on both of those?
I am. It's funny because yesterday was the transition point, and that's dragging into today, and it'll keep dragging on probably for a few more days. But yesterday I thought was the transition point where All In was out of my hands. I turn off one project and I open up the other and get on with Hoji. So for the next 5 weeks, I'm deep in Hoji.
Well, I bet you that feels good. It's a tight spot to be in and can get loose in a couple different places, but whatever. He's a nice guy. But speaking of getting deep inside of things, we are going to talk about inappropriate questions. And this is the final segment I have in all my podcasts. And I had Sherry McConkey. She was going to ask you 3 inappropriate questions. She texted me one of them, but pretty much Sherry did not come through for me this time. I hate to call her out, but I did. So I am going to come up with the 3 inappropriate questions. The first one is going to be the one that Sherry texted me, which I said did not work. But I'm going to throw it out there as a nod to Sherry McConkey. And Sherry's first question for you is, do you think they should allow snowboarding at Alta?
Yes. All people at Alta have their, problems with snowboarding because of the sidestepping or whatever it may be. When it comes right down to it, I see that as being discriminatory, and I do not like discrimination. It doesn't make any sense to me that you should be able to only ski at a place and not be able to snowboard. It's just, I don't get it.
I agree. There should be no discrimination anywhere. And thinking of that, should a boy be allowed in the Girl Scouts?
Should a boy be allowed in the Girl Scouts? Was that one of your questions?
Nope. We were talking about discrimination. It just, for some reason, made me think about that.
Yeah, that's a tougher one. I'm going to have to let that one pass.
Okay. Here is the question that I suggested to Sherry because I figured she would hear this and it would inspire her for her 3 questions. So I'll give you this one. This is question number 2. In your time in life, you've done some stupid shit and you've been around people doing stupid shit. A lot of it, and I won't say a lot of it, but some of it has involved nudity. I'm sure that you've seen nudity and you've been part of nudity situations. And first, how many people's dicks have you seen in person? And how many strangers have seen your dick?
Wow. I'm a little more bashful. I tend to expose my butt more often than frontal junk.
We can go front or back.
That's what she said. Wow, what was the first part of the question? How many dicks have I seen?
You've been around a lot of people who aren't afraid to...
I try not to look. Like, I was shooting Connery Lundeen doing front flips in front of Emerald Bay last year, and he did like 3 laps naked, and I can't tell you what his dick looks like. So yeah, I kind of, stick at head level when I'm with the crew.
So whenever there's a dick, you stick at head level? That's okay.
You'd find a way, wouldn't you?
I would. We're going to jump into question number 3, and this one is inappropriate because it could hurt some feelings, but over your time, you've worked with a shit ton of athletes. Who is the athlete that you wouldn't want to work with again, and why?
Saucer Boy. I have real trouble considering Saucer Boy an athlete. He used gravity and alcohol. I didn't see a whole lot of athleticism out of him. And he kind of had a bad attitude.
So there was no athlete that you didn't get along with, that you didn't want to shoot with?
I would love to make some entertaining answer, and this is going to sound like I'm just being cheery, nice guy, rubbing my cheeks, whatever, with my knuckles. But part of the joys of what we do is we work with so many cool people, and everyone that we work with, I really enjoyed working with to some respect. A lot of people have their negative sides to them, but I can't say there's one person that I didn't enjoy working with. If we did, it was very short-lived because we work with the same crew for so many years. We have a lot of loyal athletes, and we work with them for so long because we dig them as people. That's something for kids to learn in the sport who want to be pro athletes. Like, your attitude goes a long ways. And if you can maintain a good attitude and be someone that people want to be around, you're going to go a lot farther in this sport. And that's what we find with our crew. I mean, there's a reason we work with Mark Adma for 15, 16 years. It's because he's an awesome individual. And I think I took that maybe too far away from your question, but
no, it's good because I'm going to take it a different direction too. Is you've got the Admas of the world who are amazing to work with, and a lot of these guys are amazing to work with, but eventually some of these relationships end. And Seth, a lot of his career was on MSP until it wasn't. And is there a falling out there, or how does a relationship with a marquee athlete like that end?
I always got along with Seth really well. He wasn't a delightful person to work with, and I'm sure he knows that. But we had a good relationship, and I've never really gotten to the bottom of what exactly happened there. I think he's just the kind of guy who can get a grudge and hold that grudge and doesn't need to deal with crap. And whatever crap it was that stood between him and MSP, he just wasn't going to let it go. And I think that's unfortunate because, I mean, man, we had some great years with him, and he made a name for himself skiing for MSP, and he was huge. And I still dig the guy. I haven't seen him in years, and I haven't talked to him in a long time. But even though he had a personality that wasn't necessarily easy to deal with, I got along with him really well.
All right. Well, I want to thank you a ton for your time. Your career's been awesome. I mean, from sleeping in a car in negative 20 degrees to hooking up with MSP to having a 25-year plus career and still going, man. It's been awesome to watch. And every year I'm excited about your job because it makes my life more entertaining every fall. I'm looking forward to the movies this year, and I will be at the premieres here in Seattle. And I encourage everyone to head over to MSP's website, find out their tour dates, and buy their movie. And I want to thank you, man.
Well, thank you, Mike. I appreciate it. Powell Movement.
So that was time with Scott Gaffney, and if you look at his life, it's one that can only be made in dirtbag dreams. Throughout these podcasts, I found that a lot of people have lived in their cars to make these dreams come true, and Scott Gaffney is one of those guys. He can check that box, but his other dream of being in the Tahoe area and enjoying the community that he's been a part of for over 20 years and watching his sons do the same thing, well, that dream is in jeopardy. For the past few years, Scott and his friends, the ones that aren't sponsored by Squaw Valley, have felt their everyday lives being attacked by the corporation, KSL. They post about it online a lot, and it seems like a soap opera to me. But now that Alterra is in control, and based on my chat with Scott, it sounds like they are feeling better about the new corporation. And while hope is great, based on my time working in corporate America for a passion-based industry, I always found that when a new corporation came in, it didn't get any better. It might not have gotten much worse, but at the end of the day, it didn't get better. The goal of these public companies is to answer to their shareholders, And the last time I checked, shareholders like to return, not a cute mountain town. Now, Squaw Valley is one of my favorite places, and over the years, I've seen some changes. And if I had to put my money on it, there will be a lot more changes to come. And while the expectation of what life is in this town will be completely different to locals, their property value will go up if they were able to afford to buy a home. Anyways, enough with my stupid rant. Now is the time in the show where I'm going to ask you to help me out. And this week, I'm going to ask you to subscribe to my newsletter or Pooh's letter or number 2's letter, whatever you want to call it. It fits the Powell Movement theme, and it is the spot where you'll find out future guests as well as any giveaways I have, because I have a bunch planned for the fall, and you're not going to want to miss those. Finally, I really hope you can give me a review on whatever platform you listen to me on, especially if you're a regular listener. It really helps the show grow, and it's appreciated. If you're on an iPhone, it takes a minute, and here's what you need to do. Go to podcasts on your iPhone or iTunes, search for the Powell Movement, scroll down to where you see the stars, hit 5 stars, and you're done. Thank you so much for doing it, and thank you for listening. And I really need to thank my sponsors for making all of this possible. They are Evo, Rescue Water, and the 10 Barrel Brewery. Have a great week, everyone.